The morning sun cast long shadows across Washington, D.C.'s busy streets as Officer James Chen began his usual traffic patrol. At 28 years old, he was still considered a rookie by many of his colleagues, having joined the force just 18 months ago. His crisp blue uniform and polished badge reflected his dedication to the job, even if some thought he took his duties too seriously. That Wednesday morning started like any other. Chen monitored the intersection of Constitution Avenue and 15th Street, a notorious spot for traffic violations. His supervisor had warned him about being extra careful around government vehicles, but Chen believed in treating everyone equally under the law. At precisely 9:15 a.m., a sleek black Chevrolet Suburban with heavily tinted windows caught his attention. The vehicle accelerated through the intersection despite the light having clearly turned red. Without hesitation, Chen activated his patrol car's lights and sirens, pulling out to pursue the SUV. The Suburban initially showed no signs of stopping, continuing for another block before finally pulling over. Chen approached the vehicle cautiously, following standard procedure. As he drew closer, he noticed the distinctive government plates and the small flag mount on the front fender, though no flag was currently displayed. "License and registration, please," Chen requested firmly, positioning himself slightly behind the driver's door. The driver, a well-built man in a dark suit, turned slowly, his expression a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "Officer, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with," the driver stated calmly, reaching into his jacket. Instead of vehicle documents, he produced an official-looking credential. "We're on official government business." Chen studied the credentials carefully. They indicated that the vehicle was part of a diplomatic security detail, but that didn't change the fact that they had run a red light. "Sir, diplomatic status doesn't exempt you from basic traffic laws. Running a red light puts other citizens at risk." A sharp voice from the back seat cut through the tension. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am?" The rear window lowered, revealing an elegantly dressed woman in her 50s, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. Catherine Walsh, the Deputy Secretary of State, glared at Chen with undisguised contempt. "Ma'am, your identity doesn't change the fact that your vehicle ran a red light," Chen replied, maintaining his professional demeanor. "I have it recorded on my dashcam." Walsh's face reddened. "Young man, I'm late for a meeting with the Japanese ambassador. This is a matter of international diplomacy." Chen remained unmoved. "I understand the importance of your meeting, ma'am, but safety regulations apply to everyone. I'll try to process this as quickly as possible." As Chen returned to his patrol car to write the citation, he could see Walsh speaking angrily into her phone. His hands trembled slightly as he filled out the ticket, but he reminded himself of his father's words. "Do what's right, not what's easy." Within minutes, his radio crackled to life. Officer Chen returned to the precinct immediately, his captain's voice commanded. Chen knew this wasn't good, but he finished writing the ticket anyway. When he returned to the SUV, Walsh's window was still down, and she was wearing a satisfied smirk. "Officer, I suggest you think very carefully about your next action," she said coldly. Chen handed the ticket to the driver. "The fine is $250, and you have the right to contest this in traffic court. Please drive safely and have a good day." As he watched the Suburban pull away, Chen's radio came alive again. His captain's voice was tense. "Chen, what the hell did you just do? Get back here now." Climbing into his patrol car, Chen felt a mix of pride and anxiety. He knew he had done the right thing, but he also understood that his action would have consequences. His father, a retired beat cop, had always told him that being a good police officer meant being ready to face those consequences. The morning traffic continued its usual flow as Chen headed back to the precinct. Already, his phone was buzzing with messages from fellow officers who had somehow heard about the incident. He could almost feel the storm gathering, but something inside him remained calm. Whether it was naivety or integrity, Chen had chosen his path. Little did he know that this simple traffic stop would escalate into one of the biggest controversies to hit the DC Police Department in years, and that his decision to uphold the law without favor would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. The precinct buzzed with unusual activity when Officer Chen walked through the doors. Fellow officers shot him mixed looks, some of admiration, others of disbelief. His partner, Mike Sullivan, intercepted him before he could reach the captain's office. Man, you really stepped in it this time, Sullivan whispered, pulling Chen aside. That woman you ticketed. She's already called the mayor's office. The chief of police is on his way down here. Chen's stomach tightened, but he maintained his composure. I was just doing my job, Mike. The dash cam footage clearly shows the violation. Before Sullivan could respond, Captain Rodriguez's voice boomed across the room. Chen, my office now. The short walk to the captain's office felt like walking through molasses. Inside, Captain Rodriguez wasn't alone. Two men in expensive suits stood by the window, and Chief Williams occupied one of the chairs. Officer Chen, the chief began, his voice carefully controlled. Would you care to explain why the Deputy Secretary of State just called me, absolutely livid about one of my officers? Chen stood at attention. Sir, at approximately 9:15 this morning, I observed a black Suburban run a red light at Constitution and 15th. I conducted a routine traffic stop and issued a citation according to department protocol. And when you learned who was in the vehicle, you didn't think to use your discretion. One of the suited men interrupted. The law applies equally to everyone, sir, Chen replied firmly. The violation is on camera, and it posed a real safety risk to pedestrians and other vehicles. Captain Rodriguez rubbed his temples. Chen, there's following protocol, and then there's common sense. Do you know how many important meetings you disrupted? The diplomatic implications. With all due respect, Captain, Chen interrupted, immediately regretting his boldness. What about the implications of showing that some people are above the law? The room fell silent. Chief Williams leaned forward in his chair, studying Chen carefully. Officer, I understand your position, but this situation requires a more nuanced approach. Ms. Walsh has agreed to let this go if we void the ticket immediately. Just then, a junior officer burst into the room without knocking. Chief, you need to see this. He held up his phone, showing a social media post that was rapidly going viral. The video, taken by a bystander, showed Walsh berating Chen during the traffic stop. The caption read, "Watch this entitled Gov official try to bully a cop just doing his job. Hashtag the Buffalo." The suited men huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. Chief Williams's phone started ringing, the first of what would become an endless stream of calls from the press. Well, this complicates things, the chief muttered, declining the call. Chen, go home. You're on administrative leave pending review. But sir, that's an order, officer. We need to contain this situation before it gets worse. As Chen left the precinct, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News outlets were already trying to contact him, and his social media notifications were exploding. He switched off his phone and drove home in silence. At his small apartment, Chen found his father waiting. The elder Chen, who had served on the force for 30 years, had already seen the viral video. I heard what happened, his father said, as James slumped onto the couch. You know, when I told you to always do what's right, I didn't expect you to start with a deputy secretary. James managed a weak smile. What would you have done, Dad? His father sat beside him. Probably the same thing, and probably would have gotten in just as much trouble. He paused, then added, but you know this isn't over, right? People like Walsh don't take humiliation lightly. As if confirming his words, the TV news was already running the story. The anchor was saying, sources close to Deputy Secretary Walsh claimed the officer was unnecessarily aggressive, and that she was on her way to crucial diplomatic negotiations. Chen watched as his simple traffic stop transformed into a national debate about privilege, power, and justice. His father squeezed his shoulder supportively. Get some rest, son, the elder Chen advised. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Where the powerful feel threatened, they fight back hard. But remember, the truth has a way of coming out, and karma. Well, karma doesn't check diplomatic credentials. Looking at the growing media circus on his TV screen, Officer James Chen wondered if doing the right thing would cost him the career he'd dreamed of since childhood. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a story that would shake Washington's power structure to its core. The next morning, Washington, D.C. awakened to find Officer Chen's story splashed across every major news outlet. While Chen tried to maintain a low profile at home, Deputy Secretary Walsh launched a calculated offensive against him from her elegant Georgetown office. This is a clear case of an officer overstepping his bounds. Walsh declared to a carefully selected group of reporters. In these sensitive diplomatic times, we cannot have inexperienced officers disrupting crucial government operations. Meanwhile, in a small conference room at the police union headquarters, Chen sat with his union representative, Sarah Martinez, reviewing the dashcam footage for the 10th time. "They're trying to paint you as overzealous and unprofessional," Martinez said, pausing the video. "But this footage shows you are nothing but polite and professional. The problem is, they're pushing hard for disciplinary action." Chen nodded silently, watching as his recorded self calmly handled the situation. The footage clearly showed Walsh's SUV running the red light and her subsequent angry reaction. His phone buzzed, another reporter seeking comment. He received 47 calls since yesterday. Following the union's advice, he hadn't answered any of them. "There's something else?" Martinez said, sliding a folder across the table. "We did some digging. That SUV has been flagged for traffic violations 6 times in the past 3 months. Every ticket was mysteriously voided." Chen leaned forward. 6 times? Red lights, speeding, illegal parking. All disappeared after calls from Walsh's office. Martinez smiled grimly. They thought they could bury this too, but they didn't count on it going viral. Just then, Chen's father burst into the room, waving his phone. "James, turn on the news. Now." They flipped on the small TV in the corner. Walsh was holding another press conference, but this time she looked rattled. Behind her, protesters had gathered outside her office building, holding signs reading "No one above the law" and "Support Officer Chen." "The situation has been blown out of proportion," Walsh was saying, her usual confidence wavering. "My office has always respected law enforcement." She was interrupted by a reporter. "Ms. Walsh, can you comment on reports that your vehicle has been involved in multiple traffic violations that were subsequently dismissed?" The camera caught Walsh's momentary flash of panic before she composed herself. "I'm not aware of any such incidents. Now, if you'll excuse me." Back in the conference room, Martinez's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she turned to Chen with a serious expression. "That was my contact in internal affairs. Walsh's office is pushing for an investigation into your past conduct. They're looking for anything to discredit you." Chen's father snorted. "Good luck with that. My son's never even had a parking ticket." "It's not just about me anymore, is it?" Chen asked quietly. Martinez shook her head. "This has become about everything. Privilege, accountability, abuse of power. The public's watching closely." Suddenly, all their phones buzzed simultaneously. A new video had surfaced, security footage from a coffee shop near the intersection, showing Walsh's SUV nearly hitting a pedestrian as it ran the red light. "This changes everything," Martinez said, already dialing numbers. "We need to get ahead of this." Chen's father placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Remember when you were 10, and you insisted on telling the principal that it was the star quarterback who broke the library window, even though everyone told you to keep quiet?" Chen smiled at the memory. "You said it's not about who they are. It's about what's right. And now look, that same stubborn integrity is shaking up Washington." Their conversation was interrupted by Martinez returning. "The police chief wants to meet. Now, and he's bringing the mayor's chief of staff." As they gathered their things, Chen's phone buzzed one final time. It was a text from an unknown number. "You have no idea what you've started, Officer Chen. Not everyone in power appreciates being challenged. Watch your back." Chen showed the message to Martinez, who immediately began documenting it. Outside, media vans lined the street, and in the distance, they could hear protesters chanting near Walsh's office. "Ready for this?" Martinez asked as they prepared to leave. Chen straightened his tie and thought about all those voided tickets, about the pedestrian who almost got hit, about every time someone in power had gotten away with breaking the law. "Yes," he replied firmly. "Whatever happens next, I'm ready." What none of them knew was that Walsh's office was harboring even darker secrets, and this traffic stop was about to unravel something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. The meeting at City Hall felt more like a war room gathering than a police discussion. Officer Chen sat at one end of the long mahogany table, while Mayor Thompson, Police Chief Williams, and various officials filled the other seats. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Officer Chen," Mayor Thompson began, fingers steepled under his chin. This situation has escalated beyond anyone's expectations. The public protests are growing larger. Deputy Secretary Walsh's office is threatening legal action. Before Chen could respond, his union representative, Martinez, interjected. Any legal action would require full discovery, including all records of previously voided tickets. The mayor's chief of staff shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Just then, an aide burst into the room, tablet in hand. "Sir, you need to see this immediately." Everyone leaned forward as the aide pulled up a news website. The headline made Chen's heart skip. HCCAUSIV. Walsh's SUV involved in hit and run last month. Charges dropped after high-level intervention. Chief Williams cursed under his breath. The mayor's face turned ashen. "This isn't just about a traffic ticket anymore, is it?" Chen asked quietly. "No, it's not," the mayor admitted, loosening his tie. "Officer Chen, we've received some concerning information. There are patterns of similar incidents involving various high-ranking officials. Your traffic stop didn't just expose Walsh. It cracked open a door we've all been pretending wasn't there." Martinez pulled out her own tablet. "We've been contacted by 3 other officers who claimed they were pressured to void tickets for government vehicles. They're willing to go on record." The room erupted in hushed conversations. The chief of staff huddled with the mayor, while other officials whispered urgently into their phones. Suddenly, all their phones buzzed simultaneously. Walsh had called an emergency press conference. They turned to the wall-mounted TV just as she approached the podium outside her office. "These allegations are a coordinated attack on our government's integrity," Walsh declared, her voice steady but her hands gripping the podium tightly. Officer Chen's actions were not those of a dedicated public servant, but of someone seeking attention and notoriety. Chen watched as Walsh unveiled what she thought was her trump card. Grainy security footage showing him arguing with a superior officer 6 months ago over a different traffic stop involving a council member. "This officer has a history of targeting government officials," Walsh claimed. "His actions are politically motivated." Martinez smiled unexpectedly. "She just made a huge mistake." "Why?" Chen asked. "Because," his union rep explained, "that incident 6 months ago, you were arguing because you refused to void that ticket too. It proves this isn't about targeting officials, it's about consistently enforcing the law." The mayor's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he addressed the room. "The FBI has just opened an investigation into the hit-and-run incident. They're requesting all records of voided tickets for diplomatic and government vehicles for the past year." Chief Williams stood up. "Officer Chen, given the circumstances, your administrative leave is suspended. Report back to duty tomorrow." But, he added firmly, "Stick to desk work for now. We're concerned about your safety." As if to underscore his point, another aide entered with a report of threatening messages being posted online by Walsh's supporters. Some were calling for Chen's badge, others were making more ominous threats. "This is bigger than any of us imagined," the mayor said, looking tired. "Officer Chen, you've opened Pandora's box. There's no closing it now." As the meeting concluded, Chen's phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Just saw Walsh's press conference. She's scared. Remember, when they fight this hard, it means you're getting close to something they really want to hide." Outside City Hall, protesters had gathered, many holding signs supporting Chen. News cameras swiveled to capture him exiting the building. Martinez guided him through the crowd, deflecting questions from reporters. "Officer Chen, what do you say to Walsh's accusations? Are you aware of other cover-ups? Do you fear for your safety?" Chen remained silent, following his union rep's advice, but he couldn't help noticing that for every angry face in the crowd, there were 3 supportive ones. Regular citizens who were tired of watching the powerful play by different rules. As he climbed into his car, Chen spotted a familiar face in the crowd, the pedestrian from the coffee shop video who had nearly been hit by Walsh's SUV. Their eyes met briefly, and the man nodded in silent acknowledgement. The truth was coming out, piece by piece, and there was nothing Walsh or anyone else could do to stop it. The FBI investigation moved with unexpected speed. Just 3 days after launching their inquiry, agents occupied an entire floor of the J. Edgar Hoover building, sifting through mountains of traffic records, surveillance footage, and phone logs. Officer Chen sat across from Special Agent Lisa Morgan, watching as she spread photographs across her desk. Each image showed Walsh's SUV at different traffic incidents over the past year. Officer Chen, what you stumbled upon goes far beyond traffic violations, Agent Morgan explained, her voice steady. We've uncovered a pattern of systematic abuse of power, not just by Walsh, but by several high-ranking officials. She pushed forward a document, a list of phone calls made from Walsh's office to various police precincts, traffic courts, and city officials. The timestamps corresponded perfectly with each voided ticket. Meanwhile, across town, Deputy Secretary Walsh was facing her own crisis. Her carefully constructed press narrative was crumbling as more evidence emerged. Her assistant, Thomas Reed, entered her office with more bad news. "Ma'am, the witness from the hit and run has agreed to testify," Reed reported nervously. "And there's something else. The dashcam footage from that night wasn't completely erased as we were told." Walsh's face drained of color. What else could possibly go wrong? She demanded, just as her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she'd hoped never to see, the Office of Professional Responsibility. Back at the FBI office, Agent Morgan was showing Chen security footage from multiple government parking facilities. "Look at these timestamps," she pointed out. "The same SUV, different drivers, all using your diplomatic credentials. Your traffic stop exposed something much bigger than just Walsh." Chen leaned forward, studying the footage. They were using official vehicles for personal business? Among other things, Morgan nodded grimly. "We found evidence of unauthorized use of diplomatic vehicles, falsified travel logs, and systematic intimidation of law enforcement officers who tried to enforce regulations." Just then, Morgan's phone lit up with an urgent message. Walsh had suddenly canceled all of her appointments and was seen leaving her office with several boxes of documents. "She's running scared," Morgan smiled, "but we're already ahead of her." Across the city, news crews gathered outside Walsh's office as FBI agents arrived with search warrants. The sight of federal agents carrying boxes of documents past the same podium where Walsh had confidently dismissed Chen's actions just days ago created a powerful image. Chen's father called during his lunch break. "Son, turn on the news. They're saying this goes all the way to the top. Multiple departments, years of cover-ups." As Chen watched the coverage, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Unlike the previous threatening messages, this one was different. "Thank you for having the courage to stand up. More of us should have done the same." A former Walsh staff member. By late afternoon, the story had evolved again. Journalists uncovered a whistleblower report from 2 years ago, buried by Walsh's office, detailing similar abuses of power. The officer who filed it had been forced to resign. Martinez arrived at the FBI office with more evidence. "Remember that hit-and-run incident? We found the repair shop that fixed the SUV. They kept records, including photos of the damage. And guess who paid the bill in cash?" The investigation was moving faster than anyone anticipated. Walsh's carefully constructed network of influence was unraveling, and others implicated in the scandal were beginning to turn on each other. Chief Williams called Chen into his office late that evening. "The mayor's office just received Walsh's resignation letter," he informed him. "This isn't over. There are a lot of powerful people who were comfortable with the old system. They won't go down without a fight." As Chen left the precinct that night, he noticed he wasn't alone. 2 FBI agents discreetly followed his car, protection ordered by Agent Morgan after new threats emerged. The city felt different now. The streets he patrolled held new meaning. Every government vehicle he passed reminded him of how a simple traffic stop had exposed years of corruption. His father's words from days ago echoed in his mind. "When they fight this hard, it means you're getting close to something they really want to hide." Now they knew exactly what Walsh and others had been hiding. The question was, how deep did it really go, and who else would be exposed before this was over? The karma that had struck back at Walsh was far from finished with its work. The morning headlines sent shockwaves through Washington. "Walsh flees country. Sources confirm former deputy secretary left for Switzerland." Officer Chen read the news on his phone while sitting in Agent Morgan's office, where the FBI's investigation had expanded to fill 3 floors of the building. "She's running, but she can't hide," Morgan said, hanging up her phone. "Interpol has been notified. But that's not why I called you here." She pulled out a thick file, we found something interesting in Walsh's personal records. A list of officers she had fired or forced to resign over the past 5 years. Chen leaned forward as Morgan spread out photographs of 15 police officers. Each have attempted to hold government officials accountable, and each had paid the price. One of them committed suicide last year, Morgan said quietly, after losing everything. His final note mentioned Walsh by name. Just then, Martinez burst into the office, waving a USB drive. "You need to see this." One of Walsh's former assistants just turned whistleblower. She kept copies of everything. They watched in silence as years of corruption unfolded on Morgan's computer screen. Emails, receipts, surveillance footage. A detailed record of how Walsh and others had built their web of influence and intimidation. Across town, at the Department of State, officials scrambled to contain the damage. Emergency meetings filled every conference room as they discovered just how far Walsh's corruption had spread. Chen's phone buzzed with a message from his father. "Son, they're trying to search our house. These people are desperate." Morgan immediately dispatched agents to Chen's family home. "They're not just trying to silence the present," she explained. "They're trying to erase the past. But they're too late." By midday, 3 more high-ranking officials had resigned. The media camped outside government buildings, capturing the steady stream of people leaving with boxes and hard drives. Chen's former captain, Rodriguez, requested a meeting at a small diner away from the chaos. When Chen arrived, he found his captain looking aged and troubled. "I owe you an apology," Rodriguez said, pushing a folder across the table. "5 years ago, I received this report about Walsh's activities. I buried it. I was afraid." He paused. The officer who wrote it was found dead 3 months later. Car accident. Chen's hands trembled as he opened the folder. The report detailed everything they were uncovering now: the abuse of power, the threats, the cover-ups. The officer's name was Thomas Martinez, Sarah Martinez's brother. Back at the FBI office, Agent Morgan was connecting more dots. "Walsh didn't act alone. We've uncovered a network of officials who protected each other, shared resources, and eliminated threats to their operation." The evidence was staggering. Security cameras mysteriously malfunctioning when government vehicles were involved in incidents. Traffic court judges suddenly retiring after questioning diplomatic immunity claims. Officers who pushed back finding themselves facing internal investigations. Chen's phone kept buzzing with messages from unknown numbers, some threatening, others offering support and information. One message stood out. "Check the basement parking records from March 15th last year." Morgan's team immediately pulled the records. They discovered that on that night, 3 diplomatic vehicles had entered the parking garage. Only 2 had left. The third was found 2 weeks later in a junkyard, completely crushed. "They're getting sloppy now," Morgan observed. "Panic makes people careless." As evening approached, Chen received an unexpected visitor, Walsh's former driver, now ready to talk. He brought with him a dashcam he'd secretly installed in the SUV, containing months of unaltered footage. "I couldn't live with it anymore," the driver explained, his voice shaking. "The things I've seen, the people they've hurt. Someone had to stop it." Meanwhile, in Switzerland, Walsh was about to discover that her carefully chosen refuge wasn't as secure as she'd thought. The Swiss authorities, acting on Interpol's notice, were already moving to freeze her accounts. Chen's simple traffic stop had triggered an avalanche that was burying decades of corruption. But as his father had warned him, cornered prey is often the most dangerous. That night, as Chen drove home under FBI protection, he noticed a black SUV following at a distance. The game wasn't over yet. Some players were still willing to fight dirty to protect what remained of their power. But this time, they weren't fighting a lone traffic cop. They were facing the full force of justice they'd spent years subverting. And karma wasn't done with them yet. The FBI's investigation reached a dramatic turning point on a rainy Thursday morning. Agent Morgan summoned C. "We've got her," Morgan announced, pointing to a grainy image of Walsh at a Swiss cafe. "But there's something bigger happening. Watch this." The footage showed Walsh meeting with 3 other high-ranking officials who had supposedly been in different countries. They were all there, in the same place, planning something. "They're desperate," Morgan explained. "Our team intercepted encrypted messages. They're planning to release compromising information about every officer who ever stood up to them, including you, Chen." Chen watched the surveillance feeds, his expression steady. What could they possibly have on me? Nothing real, Martinez said, entering the room with a stack of files. But they're manufacturing evidence. Fake body cam footage, doctored reports, paid witnesses. They're trying to destroy you completely. Suddenly, all the screens went dark. When they flickered back to life, a different video was playing. Footage from Chen's past traffic stops, but edited to make him appear aggressive and corrupt. It's already hitting social media, an FBI tech analyst reported. They're flooding every platform with it. Chen's phone exploded with notifications as the falsified videos spread. His father called, voice urgent. They're showing these videos on national news, son. Even some of your supporters are starting to question everything. But Walsh's team had made a crucial mistake. In their rush to discredit Chen, they'd used footage from cameras that didn't exist at the claimed dates. Agent Morgan's team caught the inconsistency within hours. They're getting sloppy, Morgan smiled. And we just got a lucky break. One of Walsh's closest allies, feeling the pressure, had cracked. He arrived at the FBI office with a hard drive containing years of original footage, the real versions of every incident they tried to fake. Across the city, news stations began broadcasting side-by-side comparisons of the real and doctored videos. Walsh's desperate attempt to destroy Chen was backfiring spectacularly. But why go to all this trouble? Chen wondered aloud. Why not just disappear with their money? Martinez's phone buzzed. Her face went pale as she read the message. Because this was never just about traffic tickets or diplomatic immunity. The transportation records we found, they were covering up something much darker. Agent Morgan quickly assembled a task force. The investigation had uncovered a pattern. Every time Walsh's vehicles were involved in traffic incidents, they were carrying diplomatic pouches. Pouches that were exempt from normal security screening. They weren't just abusing power, Morgan explained, laying out surveillance photos. They were using diplomatic immunity to run a sophisticated smuggling operation. The traffic violations weren't the crime, they were the cover-up. Chen's father, a former detective, arrived at the FBI office with his own discovery. He'd been quietly investigating similar patterns during his time on the force. The accidents, the intimidation, the cover-ups. It was all to protect their real operation. As if on cue, Interpol sent confirmation. Walsh and her associates have been running a global network, using diplomatic channels to move contraband. Every officer who'd gotten too close had been silenced or discredited. Your traffic stop didn't just expose corruption, Morgan told Chen. It exposed an international criminal enterprise hiding behind diplomatic credentials. The evidence was overwhelming. Within hours, arrests began worldwide. Officials who had been untouchable for years were now in custody. The network was collapsing. But in Switzerland, Walsh made one final desperate move. She called a press conference, promising to reveal the real truth about corruption in American law enforcement. As cameras rolled worldwide, Walsh stood at the podium, ready to deliver her carefully crafted lies. But before she could speak, Swiss police appeared. The game was over. Back in Washington, Chen watched the arrest livestream from the FBI office. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Thank you for your courage. Because of you, we can finally tell the truth. The officers who came before. Martinez placed a hand on his shoulder. You know this isn't over, right? There are still people out there who helped them, who covered for them. Chen nodded, thinking about how a simple traffic stop had unraveled an international criminal conspiracy. Then we keep doing our job, he said quietly. One traffic stop at a time. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the city, a city where the balance of power had shifted, where karma had finally caught up with those who thought themselves above the law. 1 month after Walsh's arrest in Switzerland, Officer James Chen stood before the Senate Oversight Committee. Officer Chen, the committee chairman, began, your actions exposed one of the largest corruption scandals in diplomatic history. Today, we'd like to hear your complete testimony. Chen looked across the room, spotting his father in the audience, then at Agent Morgan and Martinez, who sat ready with their evidence. The moment felt surreal, a traffic cop addressing the nation's leaders about international corruption. It started with a simple red light violation, Chen began, his voice steady, but it exposed a system where power had replaced law, where threats had replaced justice. As he spoke, screens behind him displayed the evidence. Walsh's network of corruption, the smuggling operations, the systematic intimidation of law enforcement officers. The senators leaned forward, some taking notes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. 17 officers lost their careers, Chen continued. 3 lost their lives in suspicious accidents, all because they tried to uphold the law equally. In Switzerland, Walsh watched the testimony from her detention cell. Her extradition hearing was scheduled for the next day. The empire she built had crumbled, and her former allies were scrambling to make deals with prosecutors. Back in Washington, Chen's testimony was having an immediate impact. The committee announced emergency measures to reform diplomatic immunity protocols. No longer would diplomatic credentials serve as a shield for criminal behavior. Your actions have changed things, Agent Morgan told Chen during a break in the testimony. We've already arrested 32 officials in 12 countries. The entire network is exposed. Chen's father approached him during lunch, carrying an old photograph. It showed Chen as a child, wearing his father's police cap. Remember what I told you when you first joined the force? His father asked. The badge doesn't give us power, Chen recited. It gives us responsibility. The afternoon session brought surprise testimony from Walsh's former driver, who revealed the full extent of their operation. Diplomatic pouches had been used to smuggle everything from classified information to illegal artifacts. Every traffic incident had been carefully orchestrated to protect their real activities. Martinez presented evidence of how Walsh's organization had manipulated the system, leaked internal affairs reports, falsified evidence against honest officers, and a complex network of payoffs and threats. This wasn't just about breaking traffic laws, Martinez explained to the committee. This was about creating a shadow system where certain people could operate outside any law. As the hearing concluded, the committee chairman made an unprecedented announcement. A new oversight division would be created, specifically tasked with monitoring diplomatic vehicle activities. Chen would be offered a leadership role in training its officers. Outside the hearing room, reporters swarmed Chen with questions, but his attention was drawn to a group of police officers standing quietly at the back of the crowd. They were the surviving officers who had tried to stand up to Walsh over the years. Each one nodded to him in silent acknowledgement. That evening, as Chen cleared out his old traffic division locker, preparing for his new role, his captain approached with news. The FBI had just arrested 3 more officials attempting to flee the country. The domino effect of his traffic stop was still toppling corrupt power structures. You know, his captain said, when you first joined the force, I thought you were too rigid, too by the book. Now I understand, principles aren't rigid. They're the foundation everything else stands on. Chen's phone buzzed with a final message from Agent Morgan. Walsh signed a full confession. She's naming names. This goes higher than anyone imagined. As Chen drove home that night, he stopped at the intersection where it all began. The traffic light turned red, and every car came to a proper stop. Something had changed in the city. The untouchable weren't untouchable anymore. His father was waiting at his apartment with a small celebration dinner. Proud of you, son, he said simply. You did what many of us wished we had the courage to do. Chen looked out his window at the city lights. Somewhere in Switzerland, Walsh was facing justice. Across the world, her corrupt network was being dismantled. And here in Washington, a new generation of officers would learn that no one is above the law. The karma that had struck back at Walsh hadn't just brought down one corrupt official. It had sparked a revolution in accountability, proving that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of integrity. Officer James Chen had simply done his job, one traffic stop at a time, and that had made all the difference.